Access more.
Well, hey there and hello.
It's about time.
Yeah, I know.
No, it's about time that this episode finally has happened.
Oh my goodness.
That's what I have to say about today's episode of Hey, It's the Luskos.
Yeah.
I have to say, it's about time.
It's a doozy.
It's about time that Louie Giglio came on Hey, It's the Luskos.
Yeah. We're so thankful for
What
this
one
conversation
word
with
comes
him.
to your mind when you think about Louie Giglio?
That doesn't work with me.
Okay, what 7 words comes to mind when you think about Louie Giglio?
No, that still doesn't work. I need time.
Man, I would say this. Brilliant,
Fun.
architect, kindness, genius, quirky, peculiar, fantastic.
Wow.
Those are my 7 words. He's an icon. He's one of a kind.
Yeah,
He's Louie Giglio.
Yes, I would say the one word, I would say caring.
Caring.
He,
I thought you were going to say,
what?
I thought you were going to say Karen. That's honestly what I thought, but then it made a lot more sense when you said caring.
Caring. He is a very caring human, and how he asks me questions and how he cares for me and you and our kids. Like, he's just he's a godly man in our lives, an older man in our lives, and I'm really thankful for him.
There was a day, Jennifer. There was a day, Jennifer, when I literally prayed, God, someday I would love to get to meet Louie Giglio and just thank him for the influence that he was on me. You know, starting Fresh Life Church, we wrote down some of the things on the wall that were like ministries or, you know, brands around the country that we wanted to be like, you know, kind of like in a good way. The Bible says, you know, identify those who you see fruit and follow their faith. Had never met him, but I wrote down on the wall 722, which was the name of the Bible study that he led in Atlanta prior to starting Passion City Church. And I just, him and the way he led, the way he communicated, for me, it was always just that cool older brother, or, you know, just someone in life you're like, I want to be like that person in a good way, not in a clone way, but finding, you know, my own sound by being inspired by how God's worked through him. And Louie was always that for me.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I just can't even, I'm just pinching myself bruised that we get to have him on our podcast.
Too much. Back it down a little.
Nope, I refuse.
But
I apologize for nothing. I back nothing down. I'm doubling down on what I had to say. I'm ripping papers up with excitement over what is in store for you on this conversation. This, you know, we've had a lot of course, conversations with him. We've done ministry. We've done tours around the country now. We've had him preach at our church, and we've gotten to minister at the Grove with Shelly and at Passion City with Louie. But this conversation was tender.
Yeah.
And he opened up about some very, very special parts of his story and life and ministry and him as a young man. It was amazing.
Yeah. And for you who are listening today, I just believe that God has something special for you from this conversation, because it really is an inspiring one in the things that God's doing in Louie's life and how he's used him, but also just the things that come out of this conversation is just really beautiful. So I'm excited for you to receive what God has for you from this.
You can find Louie's brand new book, Don't Let the Enemy Have a Seat at the Table. My gosh, what a great title.
Yeah. I think you just put that on your table and just listen to that, or read
on
that.
Your table?
Just read it.
Don't let him sit at your table, Jenny.
No, like just put it on your nightstand and just read it, and it's just a good reminder. Obviously, you want to read the book.
But you know, here's the thing for me, little fun fact. If I put a book on my nightstand, that's like the one place a book will not get read. The books on my nightstand tend to not get read. If I put it by the fire pit, it'll get read.
Well, and it gets stacked up.
Wow, judgment-free zone up in this podcast. Stacks of books. That could be the title of my autobiography.
Oh my gosh.
Listen and enjoy this conversation with our friend, Louie Giglio. Well, Louie Giglio, what an enormous privilege it is to have you on Hey, It's the Luskos.
Hey,
Hey.
I'm looking at you right now. It is the Luskos right
Oh,
there.
my God.
Jenny
So great to have you, Louie.
and Levi Lusko.
Jenny, that's a good-looking man right there.
Louie Giglio.
He's the best. He's got moons behind him. For those watching on video, I think that might be the most beautiful background of any guest we've had so far.
It's true. It's true. And the most shiny table.
It's high lacquer count on that table.
Is very glossy. Hey, I like it in here. I like the moons behind, and except that one of them's right over my head right now. But other than that, I feel good about it.
But not the full moon. What is that? Is that the Guinness?
Are you guys in that place up on the out by your offices at church?
Yeah, right
Yeah.
in between her and I's office is where we've kind of parked it right now. We're working on a new set for eventually, but this is where we've been for a minute.
Hey, congrats on the podcast, by the way. It's going amazing, and you guys are doing such an incredible job. Are we still in season 1, or are we into season 2?
This is season 2, episode 52, if you can believe it.
52 episodes.
50?
What in the world?
There's
That's
2
crazy.
questions that I have. One is, how did we get here? And 2 is, how did we go 51 episodes without ever seeing a Giglio on our podcast?
Ooh.
Ooh, now we're talking about it.
Now we're talking.
You guys have people that look like y'all that do some of them, or do y'all do all of
No,
them?
it's been all of us here. Yeah, it kind of was born out of the pandemic. We started doing these episodes of noonday. I think we had you and Shelly on
time.
for tea times where
It
we
was
would just
it
have
was
tea.
3 p.m. on Tuesdays.
Yeah, because I read that Churchill would basically not let the rations for tea get cut during the Blitz in Britain. He would allow anything else to get cut. They could cut into the whiskey rations, the gas food but he did not allow them to ration tea. He said because the British people need their tea to maintain the calm, carry-on attitude. And so we said, well, let's just have tea every day with people, and that was how the podcast.
Well, I'm having tea right now, so I'm actually
Oh.
having some hot tea with honey in it because that's the way.
We're
There
in
we
tea.
go.
We're in tea as well. What kind of tea is that?
It's English breakfast tea.
Okay, we're doing this tea that Jenny loves called sweet and spicy.
Ooh.
You got
You
to
don't
try
have
it.
to add any sweetener to it. And I love sweet. I love
Good by
sweet,
itself.
but you don't have to add
I like a
sweet.
little hit of honey in mine. That's kind of my pick-me-up for the day is just that little shot of honey.
Now, you have teased it on the internet, so I'm not breaking any decorum here, but you have a podcast you're preparing for.
You know what? I was inspired by the Luskos, and I'm joining the podcast revolution. We've sort of been in and out of podcasts over the last little bit, but we're launching the Passion and Purpose podcast with Louie Giglio in about right now. And so I'm excited. My very first guest is Dr. Charles Stanley, who was my pastor at First Baptist Church Atlanta from about when I was in 7th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, till I graduated college. And I think maybe the most legendary expositor of God's word in our generation. He's 88 years old.
Wow.
And he came and we did a sit-down conversation here at Passion City a few days ago, and cannot wait for that first episode to drop.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so by the time people are listening to this, it's June. People can just go look for Passion and Purpose on, I imagine, all the platforms. Is it audio and video or just audio?
It's going to be audio and video.
Okay, so look that up, listen to that episode. If you don't mind, what were 1 or 2 nuggets that were your absolute favorite moments from that?
Well, I don't want to give away too much from that interview, but I think, Dr. Stanley has a phrase, and I can remember it from being in middle school and high school. When he came to be the pastor of First Baptist, my family was already there. But because of him coming, the church split, and it went from 3,000 people packed on a Sunday on live television on one of the 3 networks in America, in the city. So it was on like NBC live at 11 o'clock all over Atlanta, Georgia, 3,000 people, huge deal. He came and the church split, and the first Sunday he was the pastor, there were 300 people there.
Wow.
And my mom, for whatever reason, decided to be one of the 300 that stayed. And I'm so glad she did. A ton of our friends left. And so I got a front row seat, guys, to watch 300 people turn into In Touch Ministries, where right now, while we're talking, Dr. Stanley is preaching probably in every country right now. Wow. On radio or television, all over the globe right now, even at this stage of life. And his phrase was, obey God, and leave the consequences to him. And he must have said that 10,000 times over the course of my high school. And even as we were talking about it this week, he still got the conviction for that. Obey God and then leave all the consequences to him. What a simple, powerful philosophy for life. And he's lived it out. And one of the things we talked about, Levi, was, how when you're a high school kid, you're missing most of the glorious God stuff going on around you because you're concerned about something that doesn't matter.
Acne and girls and
But I barely remember, I'd be at their house because I spent a lot of time at their house growing up, Andy and I being best friends. And on a Friday, once a month, he'd come home and he'd change clothes out of his work clothes because you'd wear a suit to work back in the day. He'd put on a T-shirt and shorts. He'd get a legal pad, a gallon jug of water, and his Bible. And off he'd go, get in the family station wagon and drive off to some retreat center in North Georgia. I never knew where he went. And sometimes I'd be around on Saturday about the same time he'd come back. And that legal pad would be, every page would be full. Wow. And he would just go away with God, open up the Bible, wait on the Holy Spirit, and then I don't know if he's writing sermon outlines or vision for where the church was going, but all that was lost on me when I was 16 years old. I was just concerned, can we stay out after curfew or, do something dumb tonight? And now I remember it. And I was just thinking there sitting with him, when's the last time I took my legal pad, my Bible, and my jug of water and disappeared for a day and didn't come back till I'd heard from God? And what a word for pastors in this generation who, we grab sermon ideas off of somebody else's Insta story. So it's going to be a pretty moving conversation for everyone.
Amazing. Amazing.
Wow.
Now, what is your surrender to Christ story? So you were obviously 16 and in church, but when did that first happen for you?
Yeah, so I have never not known about the gospel. I was born in an era where they brought you to the nursery when you were 1 week old. And so when I was 12 years old, this was before Dr. Stanley came to our church, I went down the aisle, maybe 11, and I meant it. I knew who Jesus was. I knew what he did. I knew that I loved him and I wanted to follow him and be saved. Went down that Sunday morning, big, long aisle at First Baptist Church Atlanta, shook the pastor's hand, told him I wanted to become a Christian. Got baptized that night. We did things a little more, a little faster pace back in the day. And I think it was real. But Jenny, for me, when I went to college, I was on the fence. I was one kid at school and a different kid at church. We live in Atlanta, so I could be a different kid 45 minutes out in the suburbs where we lived than I was on Sunday downtown at church. And I went to Georgia State, got going on fraternity parties, thinking about rushing a fraternity. Was sitting on a curb one night, 2:00 in the morning at this fraternity party, sitting next to Andy, actually, and ended up going home that night. Got home maybe 2:33 in the morning at our little modest apartment we lived in the suburbs. And I walked in to my bedroom, and I just had clarity that moment. And this is not a knock on sororities or fraternities, if that's what God calls people to. I just knew that where I was, if I took that step, that was going to be a path and not just a moment. And I knelt down by my bed in my apartment room and in my bedroom, and I just said, God, I choose right here and right now your path. And Jesus, I want to follow you. I want to do whatever you want me to do. The phone rang the next day, the one on the wall with the long cord. And it was the guy I was talking to from that fraternity that night at 2:00. And he said, hey, we're going to offer you a bid for our fraternity today. Your name just got posted on a list at the student center. And I said, man, I know this sounds crazy and I don't want you to take it personally, but I kind of made a decision last night that I'm going to say no for right now. And I'm telling you guys, it was like us watching Shane on that Falcon 9 rocket the other day. It was where my faith ignited.
Gosh.
And the next 2 or 3 years of my life were some of the richest, most powerful moments of my relationship with God. And everything changed that night. And very soon after that, God called me to preach. I was going to Georgia State to play tennis and was in fall tryouts to be a part of the tennis team at Georgia State. I got injured. I tore a muscle on my side, couldn't raise my arm above my head. And so that was out. And in that little window of time, in the middle of the night, one night, God woke me up and called me to ministry. I mean, like a burning bush. And so all of a sudden it's, I want to follow you. It's not tennis. Oh, it's preaching the gospel. And it, you know, I think I might have gotten saved at 11, but I know for sure I got saved that night as a freshman in college.
Wow. Well,
And pretty soon after, you made the decision to there was a service where you kind of came forward as another time to consecrate yourself to ministry, right?
Yeah. So I whenever that, I don't know how much time, I don't remember how much time went past from the, I'm not going to pledge in this fraternity to now I'm out for tennis and God calling me to ministry. It could have been like 3 or 4 months time, but it was in that window. And there I went again on a Sunday night. You know, back in the day, you just had certain things you did. And if you were going to surrender to ministry, you did that on Sunday night, not on Sunday morning.
That's funny.
If you wanted to join the church, you did that on Sunday morning, not on Sunday night. So Sunday night, I go down the aisle. I take Dr. Stanley's hand. I say, Dr. Stanley, I think the Lord's calling me to preach. Then he goes, all right, well, I'm going to pray for you. And I want you to wait for me over my study after the service is over. So I go over to the study, walk in, talk to him for a minute. And he hands me this book by Oswald Chambers called So Send I You. And it's just a little paperback book. I still have it in my study at the house, that exact book. And it is a study of Isaiah 6 and the vision that Isaiah had, ending with that powerful statement, here I am, send me. Here am I, send me. And he said, I want you to go read this book. I want you to pray for 2 weeks. And then I want you to come back and tell me what you think about this call on your life. And so I did that. And 2 weeks later, went back down the aisle, said, I still believe God's calling me to preach. And, you know, as they did, he said, I have an announcement to make. This is Butch Giglio. That's the name I went by growing up. And he is surrendering his life to preach the gospel tonight. And we're going to pray for him and celebrate him. And there we were. So I didn't know what that meant. And I didn't have a real big plan. I just knew that's what God had called me to do. And Dr. Stanley helped me understand something that I still think is great advice, guys, for people that say, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be in full-time ministry or if I'm supposed to be a preacher. I tell people, is there something else you could do? Because if there's something else you could do, then go do that.
Yeah.
If there's nothing else you can do, not meaning you're not qualified, but if you can't sleep doing anything else, then surrender yourself to full-time ministry.
Yeah.
But if you can be happy being an attorney, go be an attorney.
Yeah.
If you can be happy owning a business, then go own a business. But if nothing else will satisfy, go for it.
Yeah.
That is great advice. That's what Spurgeon used to tell people. He said in lectures to my students, if you can, do it, because if otherwise you'll never have the fire to withstand the hard seasons.
Yeah.
And that you tell that story in Not Forsaken, because you invited your dad to come that night. That was you tell that story and the impact of kind of the turbulent forces there, right?
Well, it was actually a little fast forward a little bit. So I made that decision. I ended up working at the church while I was in college as an assistant to the youth pastor till I got fired from that job.
Going to need to hear that story in a minute. So we'll put a pin in that. And we're going to circle back.
To the youth
But I would come sometimes at church. The sanctuary would be dark, obviously, during the workday. But I would go in there a lot of times and stand behind that big pulpit. And I would look around. I mean, and, you know, when you're 18, 19 years old, that 3,000 seat auditorium looks like a stadium.
Yeah.
And the pulpit was enormous. And I would just go in there and stand in the dark. And I would visualize, like, will I ever preach here one day?
Wow.
And will I ever stand in a place like this and preach? And what would that be like? And I wasn't being egocentric. I just was trying to get into space and see, like, what is this? So some years went by, and Dr. Stanley asked me to come preach on a Father's Day. And, you know, typically we find these Mother's Day, Father's Day, Memorial Day, Labor Day, Time Change Sunday. Let's get a guest. So I was Father's Day
Especially
guest.
Father's Day.
And I was preaching a message that ended up being Not Forsaken, which was originally a series called Seeing God as a Perfect Father. I was preaching an embryonic version of that sermon. This is way back in the day.
Wow.
And my dad had been disabled with a brain virus and really hadn't been in life for a few years. And he hadn't been in church for a long, long time. My dad really wasn't a part of our church life at First Baptist. And here I was preaching behind that pulpit for the very first time on Father's Day for Dr. Stanley. And my dad came to church in his wheelchair for the first time in a decade, probably, that he'd been in that building. And I was so nervous. It wasn't all the people. It was my dad is sitting right there. And we had a great relationship. We just didn't have common ground around Jesus. And I was very emotional about his whole journey. Anyway, he'd been through so much hardship and pain and disability. And so the message came out. I never looked at my dad. And as the service ended, I kind of went down to that side of the platform. That's kind of what you did at our church. And that's where you met everybody and shook hands and shook a bunch of hands. And most everybody wanted to talk to my mom because she has been out of commission for a while taking care of my dad. And she is a hero in our church. And so everybody's over saying hi to my mom. And eventually I made my way over there. And I just, I just said to my dad, because my dad didn't come the night that back to your story now, the night Dr. Stanley was going to tell everybody that I'd surrendered to ministry. I asked my dad to come that night, but he didn't come. But I walked over to him this Sunday and I just said, Dad, thanks so much for coming. And he looked up to me, he has these like piercing blue eyes, and he just reached up and grabbed my hand and he said, "Are you kidding me, Ace?" That's what he used to call me. And he said, "That was the best thing I've ever heard." And, my dad had a terrible relationship with his dad, and his dad had died when I was 1 year old. So I never even knew Louie Giglio the first. And my dad never talked about him. My dad didn't live with his parents when he was a little kid, and he's got all this father stuff going on, and he really can't figure out how God loves him because his earthly dad didn't. And it was just kind of all smashed up right there. And I mean, all of a sudden, I just had a lump in my throat. I couldn't even get out "thank you" without just cracking up in that moment. And, it just was a very, very special time. I got to preach in that sanctuary maybe one or two other times before they eventually moved from that location, tore that building down, and now there's a big office building where that pulpit was. Wow. But it was a very powerful, powerful day.
Gosh, thanks for sharing that. Wow, that's so powerful.
Yeah, and it's just a perfect time just to say, I know it's been out for a while, and you have other projects you're passionate about today, but if anyone listening hasn't read or listened to the sermon series around Not Forsaken, you go into all that and more, and it is just really a word for today, because I'm convinced that all of us to some degree have father issues or mother issues, or there's just such wounds that run deep that we're either running from or trying to chase an idealized version of our childhood or what we wish our childhood was. And it is so funny that you mentioned that even that you chose to go by Louie, which is your grandfather's name, because a lot of times we think we don't have dad or mom issues because we don't want to be anything like them, but we accidentally end up becoming our grandparents that created our parents. And it's just so funny. Jesus, or in the sermon on the Mount Sinai passage where God introduces himself, part of his name is that he's the God who's faithful to keep his covenant, to visit sin to the third and fourth generation, but to 1,000 generations of those who love him. And it's just so funny how we forget how generational God is and how much of an impact these sort of things run deep.
Yeah, I told this story, but I was finishing Not Forsaken right to the end of it, and I had never heard my dad, I don't think one time, talk about his dad. And so there's a Louie Giglio, then there's my dad. They called him Junior growing up. We didn't call him that when I was a kid, but when he was coming up, everybody called him Junior. So when I was born, I was the third. And so I don't know why they picked Butch, but my mom and dad just picked that on day one, and that's what it was. And all growing up, I didn't mind that. I never had any issue with it, honestly. But when I went to seminary and left Atlanta, I went to Fort Worth to grad school. The very first day, first class, my whole elementary school, middle school, high school, you know how they take the roll the first day and they'd get down to mine, and I know it was me because they were staring at my last name, not knowing how to pronounce it. And so it would be Louie, and I would say Giglio, and then I would say I go by Butch. So this was 7th grade, 12th grade, college. This is a whole deal. But I'm sitting in grad school, and there's a friend of mine actually that I went to college with and lived here in Atlanta with, close friends. He's sitting right next to me, same class in Fort Worth. And the professor said, Louie Giglio. And I don't know what came over me. I just said, here. That was it. I was like, yep,
Louie.
that's my name.
Me. I love that.
And so when I met Shelly, I met her in Texas. She never knew who Butch was, which was kind of weird because there was a little season where Louie and Butch were in a rivalry among my close friends in Atlanta and my family. And my mom was the holdout. You know, she was like, I'm calling you Butch. But long story short, I'm finishing Not Forsaken. I'm writing about fathers and connecting to our Heavenly Father. And I get a letter from one of my distant relatives that I don't hardly even know. And she's just reminding me that my grandfather is buried in Atlanta. Not my grandfather, but my great-grandfather. Mm. So my Vito is his name. And I don't even know this. No one's ever even told me this. I didn't know I had a Giglio that lived in Atlanta. Wow. And I'm finishing the manuscript. And she said, I just wanted you to know how important it is that you have a father's blessing. I pull up on my phone this information she sends me, and 20 minutes from where I'm sitting at my house, my great-grandfather is buried. No. And he's been buried there my whole life, and I don't even know it. Gosh. Under the flight path of the Atlanta airport. So every time I have been landing and taking off at the Atlanta airport, I have been flying over my great-grandfather's grave. Wow. And I never even knew it. It's at a little tiny church that's about this big with a chain link fence around it and about 30 graves in it. And my great-grandfather is one of them. And wow. It's just God's way. He has these ways of weaving little details together at the right time to say, I see you, I love you, I'm still in the story with you. Mm. And so when we released Not Forsaken, we went out and shot the promo video in the cemetery at this little bitty white boarded up chapel on the south side of Atlanta where a Giglio is buried, my namesake. Wow. Right there in the chain link fence and a falling down neighborhood. And I was just like, Lord, this is crazy, but God has ways of letting us know that his love for us is real.
Yes. Wow. Do you know any of his story? Like, did they tell you like when he was here, if he lived in another country?
Yeah, he came here late in life, lived in a little part of Atlanta called Mechanicsville, which no one in Atlanta even knows is a place, but it's on the south side near where the Braves' old stadium used to be. And he worked for the city of Atlanta doing something mechanical. And sad story, had a heart attack on Valentine's Day, and they took him to Grady Hospital. That's the trauma hospital of Atlanta. And he was probably gone when they got there. And that's what I know about him. I saw a picture of him in front of his house down in Mechanicsville. He always had on like a fedora and this really boss-looking suit. And he had like kind of like the Studebaker car like behind him. And I'm like, okay, this guy looks like he's rolling. Wow. But obviously, you know, that's about all the story that I know. Mm-hmm. And I know that he was divorced and the Catholic Church wouldn't bury him. So he had remarried a woman who was Protestant, and her family actually, this was their family church and cemetery. So all the names in there are their family names. And then there's one Giglio in there because they let my great-grandfather get buried in their cemetery.
Vito Giglio.
Catholic Church
wouldn't have him. Strong Italian name right there.
Vito Giglio.
Hey, Vito.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, wow. Man. Would it be accurate to say that Pastor Stanley became like a father to you? I mean, was there imprint of that on you think?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely a spiritual father. I mean, he I was in their life enough to be a member of their family, went on vacation with them. And, we would drive the trailer down to Florida and he'd be pulling the trailer in the station wagon and we'd set up shop in an RV park somewhere and hang out on the beach in St. Augustine, Florida for vacation. So I knew him on that side of life, but he was more like a spiritual father to me. And there were 2 or 3 other men in my life around that time. That a guy named Dan DeHaan, who mentored me when I was in college and late high school, who died when he was 33 years old when I was in college in a plane crash. But there were 2 or 3 key men that were important in my life. And then my dad was definitely a father figure in my life. He wasn't a spiritual father, but he was a great father. And given what I learned at the end of his life about what he was dealing with his whole life, I mean, my dad had 2 brain surgeries and almost died several times in this last little season. And one day we were sitting in the hospital and we're kind of at that stage of life that we're having really open conversations about heaven and about the love of God. And I was just saying to him again, God loves you so much, Dad, and he really does care for you. And he just looked at me. My dad just looked straight into my eyes and said, "No one's ever loved me. And I can't believe that God would love me."
Wow.
And there is no response to that. I mean, I just sat there frozen and I was like, you've been carrying that our whole lifetime.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I just say that, it sounds like an older person, but if you're like a teenager, young 20s, whatever, you might, in this generation, parents tell their kids everything they're struggling with. The generation I came from, your parents didn't tell you stuff like that. And I just flipped back in my life to all these moments and I'm like, oh, that's why you were like that. That's why you responded like that. You felt abandoned. You were abandoned. He didn't feel abandoned. My dad was abandoned by his parents. And because of that, he never felt like anyone loved him. He didn't feel like our family loved him. He didn't feel like I loved him. He didn't feel like God loved him. His whole life, my dad lived that way. And from that moment on, it was so powerful because my dad lived a few years after that. And man, it was like, thank you, Lord, that, the sap can go both ways in the spiritual family tree.
Come on.
And even though it hadn't come maybe all the way down from his father to him, he had done a really great job of telling my sister and me that he loved us.
Wow.
And so now I was able to, by the power of the Spirit, spend those last 2 years of my life sending the blessing back up the family tree. And I don't know how much of it he believed, how much of it he received, but he heard it every moment we were together for the rest of his life on this earth, that, Dad, I love you. You're amazing. I am so proud of you. Thank you for the way that you love me. And my dad was a genius, brilliant man, and it was easy to celebrate him. But, people are carrying things. What's that saying? Be nice to everyone because everyone's fighting some kind of battle.
Yes.
And that's true of our parents. It's true of our spouses, our neighbors, the people that we bump into in life.
And
so good.
Everyone listening,
I feel like we're having a Louie counseling
God. No,
session.
we're going deep.
Am I being charged for this, or am I charging y'all for this?
No, man, it's helping me too. You said a couple things that I want to circle back on, but first let's just talk about how everyone listening has seen a painting your dad has done in the United States of America, because he designed the Chick-fil-A logo.
Come on.
Hand drew the Chick-fil-A logo, the one with the big
on.
capital C with the chick that's made into a chicken, which is one of the greatest. Has it won awards?
I don't know. I'm not sure if it's won any awards, but it's pretty iconic. And the thing that was great about it, some guy did. I learned, some guy invented the Chick-fil-A logo that wasn't my dad. So if you go back and look this up on Wikipedia, for the first year and a half that there was a thing called Chick-fil-A, they had another logo. It's completely different. In 1964. They came to my dad and said, we want to fix this thing. And my dad created what is now the Chick-fil-A logo. And my sister, amazingly, who would have been 11 years old at the time, said she sat there and watched him do it on our sofa at our house because this was a freelance job for him, his
On the
real job.
sofa, not even at a desk. What a baller.
So he's just sitting there with a tracing pad like he would be on any given night. My dad designed food and beverage packaging for his life, like a Coca-Cola carton or a Tropicana orange juice carton. That's what he did 9 to 5. But his freelance jobs were to design logo types for things all over the city of Atlanta. One of the original Atlanta Hawks basketball logos my dad did. And she said, I remember him sitting there and showing me the chicken. Do you like the chicken? Do you like this? Do you like this? And
Wow.
man, we don't have that original. We have a lot of the original things, but not that one. But the thing that was cool is when I didn't know this because my dad had passed away. I wasn't there when he did it. My sister said she thought he did it, but we didn't really have any proof. And one day the CEO of Chick-fil-A called me and said, hey, I got something that you might want to see. And he faxed me, this tells you it's a few years ago, a copy of the original invoice for the work that they paid my dad $75.
Come on.
Whoa.
For the Chick-fil-A logo.
Stop it.
In 1964, it's handwritten on a piece of graph paper from the person who did the work, the guy that my dad worked for, the freelance guy.
Cool.
And he said, I just thought you'd like to see this. And I was like, man, I always heard my sister say my dad did this logo, but I didn't know it. He goes, oh, yeah, your dad did it. And he said, and here's the most amazing thing. We've gone through, by this time, 7 changes in ad agencies, because any big multi-billion-dollar company changes ad agencies every few years. And every one of them has wanted to rebrand our logo, that your dad's logo has made it with a few minor modifications all the way from 1964 until right now. So props to my dad. And here's the thing, guys, this is the craziest thing of all. So my dad gets this brain virus, and he has to have 24-hour-a-day care for the 6 or 7 years of his life before he dies. And I'm in Texas at the time doing campus ministry with Shelly, but we want to come to Atlanta to help my mom. We ask the Lord every year, please let us come to Atlanta. It's always a no, stay. Finally, we get to come to Atlanta. The Lord says you can go. And when we come, my dad dies. And we have no idea what in the world just happened. Yeah. In that season, the vision for Passion is born. I still don't know why my dad goes through all this pain and hardship and difficulty and why he dies. But this Passion vision is born, and now we're on this journey. Fast forward up to about 2017, we're doing an event at the Georgia Dome football stadium in Atlanta. The stage is in the middle of the football field. It's 60,000 people in this stadium. It's a 4-day event, and it's the day after New Year's Eve. A football game ends on New Year's Eve night, a college bowl game. They cover the field with a TerraPlast that looks like this tabletop. We build our stage up. We'd already hung some of our stuff in the ceiling before. We bring all our lights down. The next night, Passion starts. I go to walk up the steps onto this stage at the largest Passion event we've ever held before. And I realize I am standing on top of the logo that was on the middle of that field last night when that game ended. And it was the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. Ugh. And underneath the stage for the 4 days of the largest event we had done as Passion was my dad's Chick-fil-A logo. Oh my God. I was preaching on it, standing on it, leading on it. Yeah. And it didn't answer the question and resolve, hey, this is why this happened to your dad, or this is why I did or didn't answer this prayer. It just was one of those moments again where God said, I got all this. I got all of this. So you just keep trusting me and believe in me. And wow.
Wow. Well, even going back to the phrase that Dr. Stanley said in your life earlier, but was something that he said in the podcast too, of just obey God, walk in obedience, and then he'll sort out the consequences. Or I've totally butchered
leave the results to him. That's what you said, right?
Leave the results to him. But just how even as you've been talking, like this is the kind of life that you've been living. And from the very beginning, when you made that decision to not do the fraternity and follow God, and then each step of the way and not knowing all the whys and all the everythings, but truly looking back and seeing God taking care of the results. And it's really beautiful to see that. And just the faith that it takes to just obey and then just truly let God handle the results.
Well, you guys are an amazing picture of that. And I think everybody loves that about your story. I mean, you had a lot of different lanes you could get in besides going to Montana and planting a church. But you felt God call you to do that, and you had no idea how, when, who. You just said yes. And I think the power of that yes is in the unknown. If we knew everything, it really wouldn't be a yes. It's kind of obvious. Oh,
Right.
here's the plan. Here's how it's going to work out. Here's all the details. Then that's not really a yes. A yes is, God, I trust you, and this calling is compelling. And I remember when Shelley and I got married, I can remember it like, and I don't know why this just came in my mind, but we were standing there during maybe the song, before the final pronouncement. And we're holding hands and we're praying out loud. We can hear each other praying out loud. And what we're saying out loud is yes. We're saying, Jesus, whatever you want and wherever you want. And the only thing we knew and were convinced of the day we got married was that we wanted our lives to matter for Jesus. We weren't talking about a picket fence. We weren't talking about getting a gold doodle. We weren't talking about how much money we were going to make or what career path we were going to be on. All we cared about standing there that day was, we want our lives to make a difference for you, Jesus, because you're the most important thing in our lives. And I'm telling you, from that moment on, nothing made sense. Nothing has made sense. Nothing we have done has made sense. Planning a church when you're 50, you got to be out of your mind to do that.
Planning a church movement, period.
Yeah. Starting a thing called Passion and inviting the people of the world to a field in Memphis, Tennessee, nuts. Not going into a full-time paying job and starting a campus Bible study at Baylor University and having to scrap and claw to literally go cut a tree down out of the woods because I can't afford to buy one at the convenience store on the corner. Nuts. And somehow her parents gave us the grace to keep saying yes. And God kept providing, and there's no explanation for it. And I tell people all the time, if you get to the end of your life and somebody says, how did you do that? And you go, oh, well, it's in my new book, how I did all the things that I've done. Then that's really not much of a life.
Yeah.
You want to be able to say, I don't have any idea.
Amen.
I just kept taking the next step.
Come on.
Yeah, that's great. Attempt things so big that unless God intervenes, it's bound to fail. I think Hudson Taylor said that. You mentioned a few I just have to just say it again because it's such a good line, and it's not a line, but you just said it flippantly, and I just was like rocked by it. The sap in a family tree can flow up, not just down.
Ooh, gosh,
I just felt
so
people
good.
listening to that going, oh, like it's a gut punch, because it's a realization that we so often see ourselves as kids, even as adults. And we think that our parents are there to bless and serve us, which of course that's how it should be. We should want to serve our kids, but to remember the obligation and honor it is at times to be able to steward and serve that sap back up. That is just so
That's beautiful.
I think especially in an age where everyone's done so much therapy, to find out, I feel like I'm a little worried for the notion of sin in our day because of how much therapy people have done, that we can stop taking accountability for our actions because we've gotten so good at looking to our past to see the cause of some of our unhealthy choices. But to realize that there can be compassion and empathy for our parents, that's a needed concept that you need to continue to preach on more.
Yes.
Yeah, I think to underline the phrase is just reverse the curse. And that sounds like something you would say as you're running out onto the field at a football game or something, but it's the power of the cross. And if the gospel isn't powerful enough to transform my relationship with a parent who possibly abandoned me, or a parent who didn't bless me, or a parent who is so jacked up that they couldn't even see me, and that's a lot of people listening to us right now. If the gospel isn't powerful enough to change my heart, to be able to not brush things under the rug, that's not what we're talking about, not put myself in a dangerous situation, that's not what we're advocating, but to be able in a healthy, forthright way to go back and to bless maybe even those who cursed you. If the gospel isn't powerful enough to do that, how is it possible enough to get me to heaven?
Yeah.
How is it possible enough to get me out of the grave if it's not powerful enough to do that? And I think we put some of these things in categories of the impossible. And one of the things we put first in the category of the impossible is it's impossible for me to change my relationship with my parent. And it's just, I think it's because it's so essential. The Old Testament ends on the fathers blessing the children. And the New Testament begins, the Gospels begin with, and the fathers will bless the children, and the children will bless the fathers. And so there's something intrinsic and daddy, watch me. Yeah. You don't teach kids that.
Right.
They're born with it. And moms are essential in the equation, but kids are born with daddy. Do you see me? Yeah. Watch me. I'm going to do my backflip. Watch me, Dad. I'm about to do my twirl. Watch me, Dad. I'm about to run my thing. It's just woven into the fabric of who we are. Right. And the enemy knows that. So if he can break that fabric of fatherhood in our hearts, he knows he has already won the war of sinking our relationship with our Heavenly Father. And so the gospel fixes both. It reconnects us to our Heavenly Father, which is what we need most. And then it gives us the power to forgive and to bless. Again, not to brush things aside, not to ignore things that have happened, not to put ourselves in harm's way, but to bless as much as possible, to forgive as much as God has, and to speak life. And you know, what I found in my life is the power of forgiveness doesn't happen when forgiveness is received. The power of forgiveness happens the moment it's offered. Wow. And so you could write a letter to your dad and mail it and never hear back from them and still experience in your heart a sense of freedom. Because it's not, you would be awesome if he wrote you back. It would be great if he texted you back or called you back. And it would be great if there was some reciprocation. But if there isn't reciprocation, the act of forgiveness, think about this. God forgave everyone. But not everyone has reciprocated and received the forgiveness. Come on. But the power of God being God is that he forgave. Yes. And in the same way, for us, there's power in forgiving. It's beautiful if it's received and accepted and acknowledged. I need forgiveness, thank you. But it's powerful if it's offered. And I think that the cross that you were talking about a few days ago, Levi, you know, you were talking about the jabs and the jabs and the jabs, and then the power of the cross. Come on. And that power is strong enough, I believe, to repair. The prophet said that the Lord gives back what the locusts have eaten. Yes. And maybe your relationship with your parents looks like a dust bowl, but God is greater.
Jeez.
Say that.
All the things.
All of it.
Now, we spent a good amount of time in 2019, you and I remember distinctly, we did a conversation for the Passion podcast in your green room at Passion Camp. And we were just so excited about them roaring 20s. Man, them roaring 20s were coming. And you preached a nice long series, getting us all ready for the roaring 20s. And dang, Louie, if they didn't come roaring in.
I was talking about Bitcoin, and it has done very well through the 20s so far. It's the only thing that has roared.
Oh my gosh!
And everything else has been a bust. But you know,
our blood pressure's roared. I think there's.
The whole narrative has just been a turnaround, and it's been so interesting. You gave such a brilliant message kicking off 2020. Yes. Actually, you were the first message of 2020, preaching us into Passion at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and you did this whole snapshot of the Dust Bowl, yes, and then of the hope of what can come. And I think maybe what God was saying, Levi, in that message was there's going to be a Dust Bowl. And you talked about how the Dust Bowl even made it all the way to the White House. Yeah. You remember that?
Yeah.
And maybe you were being prophetic and saying and I'm not making a political statement by saying that, by the
Sure.
way. Please, we don't need any comments in the comments. But
Send your email to andy@northpoint.org if you're mad about that line.
yeah, 404-255-55655. And so maybe the prophetic word was God's going to do a new thing.
Yeah.
And in the same way that as the Roaring Twenties ended up in a collapse, but the Roaring Twenties also started in pain.
Right.
And so we're in that transition. And I believe all the things we said about God doing something new, all are going to happen. And in some ways have happened this year. More people have heard the gospel in 2020. I have no statistics to back this up, but I'm going to make a very big declarative statement. I bet more people heard the gospel last year than heard it in the 5 years before last year.
Come on.
No doubt,
I
no
believe
doubt.
it.
And so, yes, there was some pain and loss, a lot of it, and there still is. But there was also a wind of God saying, I'm going to do something that nobody even fathoms. Nobody even knows this is happening. I mean, somebody knew it when we were at Passion. Passion probably was a super spreader event for all I know.
No doubt.
65,000 people in a football stadium on January 1st, 2020. Who knows what was going on?
Who knows?
But at the same time, Levi, your word was prophetic. And so we still have some dust in our teeth right now.
Right.
And it did make it all the way across the country.
To the White House, yeah.
And it landed in the White House. It landed in New York City. It landed in Atlanta, Georgia. And it's blown its way all the way around the globe, this cloud has. But what happened after the Dust Bowl, is that people replanted.
The New Deal.
And so I still am a man of hope. And
Yes.
this year has been extremely hard for people like you and me who've tried to shepherd a flock.
Yeah.
And all of our sheep aren't of the same ilk necessarily, spiritually in Jesus, but politically, culturally, pandemically, people are all over the map. And it's been a real big challenge, but every leader wants to keep rising above. That's what leaders do.
Yeah.
They just say, okay, here's the cloud. I'm going to trust God to help me get a little higher than the cloud.
Yes.
So that I can keep saying there's a future out there.
Come on.
And his name is Jesus. Let's keep our eyes on him.
And
Yes.
let's plant some trees, right? That
Yes.
shelter belt. Plant
Amen.
one tree at a time. It takes a long time to plant a 100-mile belt of trees from Canada to Mexico, but one tree at a time. And then from there, we went into Christine Kane's talk about digging out wells.
Oof.
And let's dig out those wells of prayer, wells of fast. Let's dig out the wells of study. And then you helped us to see that it's in the midst of whatever is there written, we get to turn a page.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
And I can't
Next
tell you how many
level.
times I've thought about those days
Yeah.
in these times, how much of a time capsule, how much of a life preserver, how much of a
Yes.
preview of coming attractions that all was. I mean,
Yes.
it's uncanny.
I don't think any of us could imagine that was going to be the last stadium event of faith
Yeah.
for a year. Maybe the one and only one in America.
And
Yeah.
counting. Here we are and counting. Yeah.
And here we are, and halfway into this year. And what a gift
Yes.
to have it and for it to be as spirit-led as it was.
Yes.
Oh,
There were some holy
the
moments.
roof opening on Carrie Job and the glory of God shining down on that room.
The wind blowing.
Yes.
The reason why we couldn't open the roof was because of the temperature. The differential between outside and inside was too significant that if we opened the roof, it would create a wind sufficient to blow the entire staging over.
Unbelievable.
And, it was multi-story LED walls.
Yeah, that's a bad look involving many deaths.
It's bad. It's a bad ending. So that's why we couldn't open the roof. So we had to wait until the temperature differential was right, and we got it in a little window, and we had the right thing happening on stage, and we were like, hit the button, open the roof. And they're like, are you ready to open the roof? Open the roof. Do you want to open it now? Open it right now. Like, you want to push the button right now and open it? And so finally, I'm not kidding, they hit the button to open the roof, and it starts opening, and this is all imperceptible to the person who's not watching. Starts opening, and it locks, freezes, not moving. They hit reset. not resetting. Let's try to undo and redo. Let's unplug everything and plug it all back in again. Nothing. So we have to find the guy who knows how to unlock the roof when it freezes somewhere in America. And I'm not even sure I know the details of this story, whether he was in Atlanta. I think some tell me he might have been in Michigan, in Minneapolis. So this guy's in Minneapolis. We got to get this guy in Minneapolis on the phone, get him zoomed in, get him working on it. And finally, now Carrie and Cody are on stage, and Carrie is singing a song about God's presence and power coming.
Yes.
And we get word. We think we got the roof unstuck. Should we open it? And we're like, absolutely.
Yeah.
Dude hits the button.
Right as she hits the bridge, right?
Yes. She's
thing
kneeling.
opens.
Her eyes are closed.
Yeah.
Her eyes are closed, and she doesn't know what's happening. She thinks it's literally Pentecost again.
It was Pentecost.
It was Pentecost. And she has no idea, but her hair is blowing like
Her
crazy
eyelashes, it was all
the
happening.
differential was just enough that I don't know. I'm looking at one of my production guys. What was the 15 mile an hour wind? 25 mile an hour wind is blowing in this place.
God.
Everyone's hair's blowing.
Yes.
Everyone's Bible pages, journals, stuff's blowing,
Paper's
and God's
flying.
speaking, and it's just like
And the way the sun the sun just like
sun's coming in a side window
Yes.
right down across the thing, and it's just like this moment. You couldn't concoct this moment.
Nope.
If you tried. And it was just God saying, I'm here and I'm in the midst. And I remember that session ending, and nobody moved. Everybody just sat in their space. Yeah. And I just remember standing there, one of the most powerful moments of my life. And so it launched us into a weird year.
Yeah.
But it was an incredible,
but with style.
Incredible launching.
Yeah, gosh. And everything, there's such a theme to everything we're talking about. It's like, you got to look back and see that. You look back and see.
Wow, so good.
You look back and see. And I remember one time realizing that if you want to look for God's fingerprints, you got to look in the rearview mirror, because oftentimes what you see out the windshield just looks scary, and that's how you want it. Your God's calling you just to charge into it. And then you look back and you see, oh, you were weaving. You take care of the weaving. I'll just keep going, and man, well, you are carrying a new message these days. You have it there in front of you. Those who are watching on video can see I'm holding in my hands, although I have to take off this little back thing, because is that the direction we hold it in? It's this brand new,
genius, Louie.
beautiful
this is genius.
book. Don't give the enemy a seat at your table. It's time to win the battle of your mind. This is your Louie Giglio, your 12th book. Let's just let that sit there for a hot second. I remember, I'll never forget where I was, how I felt reading your first book. I am not, but I know I am.
Same.
You open up running on accident on a bridge. That story, that book's fantastic. Moses.
Gosh. If you haven't read it, you've got to read it.
And you haven't missed. There's people who just churn books out because, and I'm not throwing shade. There's people who's like, oh, the clock strikes 9. It's time to release a book. And so something gets put out, and that's fine. But you pour your soul into these things. You agonize, because that's how you do everything with intentionality and precision and passion, and you feel it, and it's like a birth every time. But I remember watching you kind of getting pregnant with this message when you first communicated it, and there was like, that's a special one. Yeah. And then from then to now, it's been released, and man, congratulations.
Well, thank you. And that means a lot coming from both of you. I consider you two of my favorite authors, and if you don't have a Through the Eyes of a Lion, a Swipe Right, and I Declare War, you got to write 12 books. So, you've got some pretty big hitters in there. And then Jenny's new book has just been such a smash. And Jenny, I just want to say again, I'm just going to be kind of honest for a minute. A lot of the light is on Levi, because he's an extraordinarily gifted communicator, one of the most extraordinarily gifted communicators in this generation. Yes. And here you are with creativity, organization, You know how to pull people together. You know how to keep this guy like he has no idea what day it is today or where he needs to be right now. But you've been able to lead this family and lead him and lead a church. And together y'all have made this amazing team. But Levi's the communicator of the family. And so I know that you stared at this mountain for a long, long time and said, you know, Shelly's deal is one communicator per family. That's been her rule since we started.
I like that
Say,
motto.
babe, I want you to preach. Will you speak? Will you do this? She's like, no, one communicator per family. Well, then she spoke at something and someone said, well, I'll buy into the one communicator per family thing. Louie, you're going to need to find something else to do. And so I know that mountain. And Jenny, I know you stared at that mountain for a long time and thought, you know, Levi's the communicator in our family and he's the author in our family. And he is. And I would predict, Levi, you're going to write 50 amazing books in your lifetime.
Yes.
And I cannot wait for your new book, by the way, that you just turned in. I am so jacked.
Me too.
But Jenny, for you to say, I have something to say, and I'm going to go up that mountain, even if maybe every voice is telling me that's not my mountain to go up. And then you wrote the most powerful, vulnerable, helpful, courageous book. And I'm so proud of you for doing that. I know Levi tells you that, but on behalf of so many people, thank you for going up that mountain. And I know it's not going to be the last book that you write, but it's pretty awesome. And, you know, someone asked me a typical kind of interview question. You guys have done a million of them. So who'd you write this book for? And that's the first time I've been asked that. And the answer came to me super easy. I said, I wrote this book for me. And I think that's what makes the message special for me, is that I'm not writing this book because I think somebody else needs it. I'm writing it because I know I need it.
Yeah.
And the one thing I'm an expert on, and I am an expert on something I'd like to declare right here on the Hey, It's the Luskos podcast. I'm an expert on being human. I've been human every day of my life. And I know what I struggle with. And I know how the process works. And I know that nothing is easy. And these sermons that we preach, they sound so great and grand, but they come out of the meat grinder of our lives. And I always talk about preaching being a funnel, not a megaphone. I don't have some big thing and I'm going to shout my message out to the world and it's little and it's going to get big. My messages go in the top of a funnel, and by the time they come out, there's like a drop that comes out the bottom into my heart, and it's the drop that I preach. And this book is about God helping me realize how I had allowed the enemy to just rock up to my table, the table that my shepherd had prepared for me, and how I was allowing him to put these thoughts in my mind and actually cause me to get in holding patterns over these thoughts until they became neuro highways in my brain. And God is saying, look, you've got authority to take your table back. Hello. And you've got authority to replace these negative thoughts with positive thoughts. And Dr. Caroline Leaf was talking with me the other day, and she's a neuroscientist. She's not a pastor. But she's unpacking all this from a scientific point of view. And she said, 66 days, you think about what is true. For 66 days, you create a new neuro pathway in your brain. And it is now a highway that you can ride on and drive down for the rest of your life. And then you can go to work on the next neural highway that you want to create in your brain. So that's what the book is all about. It's about me discovering through a text from a friend that I'd given the enemy a seat at my table, and it was time for me to win the battle of my mind. And the book helped me. That message helped me that day. It's helped me every week since that. That was several years ago. And I know because it's helped me, I have confidence it's going to help somebody else.
Amen. I agree. Thank you for your words earlier. But I agree that every single person needs to read this, because whether we struggle with anxiety or whatever, we all struggle in this battle of our minds. And this is a powerful word for all of us.
Louie, when was the first time, you mentioned a couple ages, 6th and 7th grade, watching Charles Stanley go through the church split. I can't even imagine for him. And we've had that happen a couple times. We had a campus pastor leave, and couple hundred people go with him, and this, that, and the other. And that's hard for him to face. So that was probably your first experience watching someone go through intense dejection like that. And you mentioned him leading so fearlessly through it. But I wonder if you recall the first time you remember dealing with intense dejection or intense moods or depressiveness or anxiety. Do you recall that specifically?
I never considered myself really somebody that was going to get in a ring with anxiety. But I think it had been building up for a while. But the season for me where it all came crashing down was that season where we planted the church. And it was 2008, and 2008, most people don't remember it, but it was a kind of a pandemic of its own. There was a global financial melt-up from subprime mortgage, and people like me who were at a stage of life where they were 50, half of most people's savings disappeared, like literally in 4 days. So if you put your retirement away for your whole life and it was this, in 4 days it was this. And we did a world tour. We went to 17 cities and 16 nations that year, had to raise $6 million from scratch. My mom was falling down in the street at her mailbox because of Parkinson's and laying there until a kind passerby would stop and help her get up and get back to her house. So many things were going on, and I cracked, and I mean, completely. And when I look back now, like you talk about, Levi, a lot of it was related to planting the church. And I'm not trying to, as you say, throw shade on anybody. This is probably all the enemy in my head mostly. But we just had a little tribe of people that we were starting out with. And someone emailed Shelley and me, probably in their mind, a very innocent email. These people loved us. We loved them. But the email was just like a jab. And I don't mean like a jab, 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 cross. It was like a pointy jab. And we were barely, we weren't even public yet. We were just barely going.
It sounds like a prison jab with a sharpened toothbrush, and it punctured your kidney or something. Yeah.
And I remember, I can tell you exactly how it went down when she was reading the email out loud. And both of us looked at each other, and I know the look on her face was probably the same as the one she saw on my face, and it was, what in the world have we just gotten into? What are we doing? Yeah. Because leading a movement is very easy to do. We have an objective. We're doing an event. It's on January 1st through the 4th. It's going to be in this city. We're inviting this many people. Here's who's speaking. Here's the purpose of it. We will serve lunch. And when it's over, we will wrap up and we will all go home. Very easy to do. Everybody knows the mission. Right. Church is a family, and the doors are open. Yeah. And anyone can come through our doors this week. We welcome people to come and join along with us in God's church. But now it's a daily event. And so we're all in life together. Yeah. And when you're all in life together and you're the pastor and the leader, every one of your ideas, A, isn't going to be a good idea. So let's just say that. Right. B, every one of your ideas isn't going to be somebody else's idea. And every single church is going to have division. And I remember sitting at the table with my friend, and I said, the Lord's leading me to plant a church. And he tried to talk me out of it, my best friend. And just said, no, not at 50, a bad move. You got it all backwards. Everybody's lived their whole life to get to where you are right now. You don't want to have to go back and do all that. You don't need all that aggravation. It's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. And I was like, thank you for the encouragement. But I was so convinced, and Shelley and I were so convinced. And we believed, and I'm glad we did, that we were going to be the one church that wasn't like any other church. And we were convinced of it. And I'm glad we were. And I hope everybody that plants a church is convinced that their church isn't going to be that church that has the problem or has some family that's upset or has a staff issue or somebody gets mad and leaves. And they're saying that's not going to be us, because you want to believe that going in. Yeah. But the reality of it is our church is made of human beings. Right. And that therefore our church is like every other church. And so when that dream crashed, it was hard. It was hard to swallow that the dream was now turning into reality. And the reality was going to be a bumpy road. And that's just what pastoring a church is. It's a hard and a bumpy road.
Yeah.
But man, I'm so grateful for the last 11, 12 years we've been in this. And I'm so grateful for the team that's around us. We have an incredible team around us.
Yeah, you do.
Extraordinary people. You guys are around our house. And every time you go like, man, y'all's team, your
Yes.
people are the best people on planet Earth.
Yeah.
And so together we just keeping our eyes on Jesus, preaching the gospel to the city, trying to tell the story of God in creative ways every week and be a light in our neighborhood and a light in the city, in the cities that we're in. And it's not easy. And I'd say that's probably those first few months were the first place, Levi, where I was like, okay, this is not going to be applause every day. But leadership isn't about getting applause every day. It's about loving people around you well and about chasing a vision that's bigger than yourself.
God, somebody stop right there and tweet that.
Yes.
I mean,
and that's what we are trying to do. And I think for Shelley and me, we have capitulated to the idea that everyone won't be with us forever. Very few people will be with us forever. And we want to love the people who are around us while we're together.
Yes.
And we want to cast a vision that's bigger than ourselves so that everyone here can do what that little phrase says. I know that the story I'm a part of is bigger than the role I play. Mm-hmm. Everyone wants to be a part of something like that.
Yes.
Or most people want to be a part of something like that. And I do. And I got a couple of my teammates are in here right now. They're just nodding along. They're the kind of people that I want to work with every single day because they're like me. They don't want their part to be bigger than the story that they're in. They want the story they're in to be bigger than the part that they play.
Yeah. Amen.
And thankfully, God has invited us into his story. And man, what a privilege.
But what you're saying is, and that's all very powerful and compelling and life-changing for every leader listening, everyone in business listening. I mean, there's principles for that to apply to anything. But, it was an email, and that email snuck through, and it's oftentimes when we least expect it that those emails, those text messages, that you look at Instagram just for a second, you're about to go on a break or you're about to go on vacation, but just one quick look, and and the enemy knows he's a master of anything. If he's good at anything, it's timing. And you mentioned so well you put it so well in the book, and it's very eye-opening. He's a fisherman, he's trying to get a hook in your mouth, and he doesn't show up with a megaphone and broadcast, "Hey fish, I'm gonna try and catch you. FYI, if you see any little pretend fish running around, it's not a real one. Just watch out for it. You'll hurt your throat." Obviously the fishermen are clever, and the enemy is just so good at when to set the hook, at what bait to use, at when to run it by you. You weren't even planning on eating anything, but it just went right down the current. It was so delightful, and and everyone listening knows what it feels like to have your entire sense of equilibrium thrown off in a second.
Come on.
And what was going so well is now all of a sudden you're tossed into the turbulence of tension and of just, and I feel like that's what is so powerful about this book is that it's you saying, like, to everybody who's going, I'm just this time, this situation, this struggle. And you're like, hey, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I might have gathered 65,000 of my closest college student friends because I didn't join a fraternity, by the way, which is such an ironic twist to that story.
Seriously.
Go ahead and be the person God uses to touch all the college students because you made a tough decision in your college years. So you're very well qualified to call them out. But I just love that, you've done all these things. You've written so many. You're one of the most under-recognized songwriters of our generation. You've written so many unbelievable worship songs, and your messages, your talks. But here you are going, hey, I'm just as likely to invite the enemy to sit down and start eating the kiwi and the Triscuits.
Wow.
I think that all of us are susceptible, and if the plan didn't work, then the enemy wouldn't have tried it on Jesus. That's how confident he is in his plan.
Wow.
He tried it on the Son of God.
There you go.
But talk about timing. He waited till the 40th day and the 40th night was over. And I have never fasted for 40 days and 40 nights completely. So in the wilderness alone with lions and bears and who knows what else. So I don't know how weak you are in that moment. But I do know that his timing is very purposeful.
Yeah.
And he tried with Jesus the same thing he tried with Adam and Eve. So his plan has not changed. It's just that Jesus had anticipated his plan, and Jesus already had put the word of God in all the seats at the table.
Come on.
So when the enemy came up to take a seat, hey, if you're the Son of God, you can turn these stones into bread. And Jesus said, oh, thank you, but I've already put something in that seat, and it's the word of God, and I am the word of God, so I know the word of God very well. And it says, man shall not live by bread alone, but every word that comes from the mouth of God. You got another one? Yeah, here's another one. If you were to go up to the top of the temple and jump off, the angels would probably catch you before you hit the ground. Yes, I have another thing in that seat already. It's called the word of God. Don't put God to the test. And so the plan and the scheme is good. And the enemy was so good at it that he thought, I'm going to make a run at Jesus with this plan. But what Jesus is showing us is the simplicity, honestly, of how you keep the enemy away from your table.
Yeah.
And Levi, you talk about this all the time, but what is it? The average American is on their phone 3 hours a day. I mean, something like that.
I think it was 6 to 8 pre-pandemic. It's shocking what it's at now.
6 to 8 hours a day. Crazy. I know this sounds like something we're supposed to say, but I just thought the other day, and I think I had looked at my screen time, and between social media, email, news feed, there was like 3 hours and 15 minutes I was on my phone. And some of that was probably necessary for work, but a lot of it was just choices I was making. And I thought, what would my life look like if I scrolled God's word as I scroll my phone?
Yeah.
What would I look like right now? What would my mind be like right now?
Come on.
And we have got to take responsibility, and we can't, the pandemic's been a great straw man. And, we all laugh about it now. I used to go to this restaurant, and now when I go post-pandemic, it's like, oh, we don't have the roast beef, whatever, da-da-da-da-da anymore because of COVID. And I'm like, no, you don't have it because it wasn't the biggest moneymaker on your menu.
Yeah, exactly.
And now's a convenient time to get rid of it. Or, you go to anywhere and the service, oh, we don't offer that service anymore. I'm sorry, it's COVID. COVID has become a great straw man for us too, though.
Yeah.
Hey, the reason why I feel this way, the reason why I'm having all this stress, all this is because of the pandemic. And the pandemic's real. I mean, I'm not saying that we don't all have collateral from it, but it's not more real than Jesus. And it's not greater than Jesus. And it's time for us to get into the endemic mode, especially in America. India, definitely not in that zone. Brazil's not in that zone. But most of us in America are in endemic, not pandemic. And it's time to start thinking, you know what? It's time to wrap this up.
Yeah.
It's time to go ahead and wrap this episode up. And what am I going to do? Well, I'm not going to sit here and wait for the person at whatever organization to tell me what to do next, or wait for the city guideline to tell me what to do next. I already have God's word. I'm going to start getting my mind up to speed, up to snuff, because it's time to wrap this up and move on with being the person God made me to be, creating things beautiful for the world and doing the kinds of things that bring him glory. And it's time to put the straw man of COVID down.
Come on.
And it's time to pick up our calling and our mantle and say, all right, can't do that. What can I do today? Can't go there. Where can I go today? Oh, I'm not allowed to experience that yet. Okay, what can I experience today? And
jug
man,
of water. We're back to our jug of water and our legal pad now, man.
Come on.
Yes.
Let's go.
Yes.
And Craig Rochelle said it so well. He said, I'm not thinking about rebuilding what Life Church was before COVID. He said, I'm not a rebuilder, I'm a builder. And we built that. And now we're going to build again.
Come on.
And how simple is that? Every day is a new beginning. Every day is a new page. Today's the day to start.
Yes.
And so start wherever you are today and trust God to show you what he wants you to do right here and right now. That's the way stories are built.
Wow. I mean, that is, and that's the thing. You're saying this is not something you did one time and it worked, so therefore you wrote a book to sell it. this is you. What you're saying in the book is, I'm doing it right now. And you say that, you even as you write it, you're like, I just happened to me this morning. I got off, and Joshua 1:5 had to ring in your heart all day, because it's something you're not talking about in the past tense that worked. It's what you are relying on to continue to be in this fight, despite storms and difficulties and hardships that threaten to knock you out and take out your joy. And you're saying the only reason I'm still here with the light of God shining from my eyes is because of these principles that are saving my life, and they can save yours too. And I want everyone to experience that kind of freedom that you've exhibited. We've been lucky enough to be close enough to you and hear enough of the fight and the battles that have come your way to know that if it weren't for these things and what Jesus has done in you, you wouldn't be able to continue to go on. And I'm so proud of you, and so grateful you would release this message for everyone to get a walk in.
Well, Shelley and I love you guys. And, it's been a real treat. You and I met when you wrote Through the Eyes of a Lion, and you came to a conference in Tacoma, Washington, I want to say. Is that close?
That's exactly it.
And the pastor there invited you just on a whim to
Last
come over
minute,
and do a 15-minute interview to try to help people find out about the book. And I'm like, I've heard of this Levi guy. We end up going back to the hotel, sitting in the lobby. I can still remember the sofa we were sitting on, and a friendship was born.
Yeah, we were there till 2 in the morning that night.
In that moment. And I'm so grateful for the chance just to be around you guys. Shelley and I love you. We love your family. Your kids are amazing. And we've gotten to do some cool stuff together, most notably visit with our friend Shane Kimbrough behind the glass in astronaut quarantine quarters.
Oh, my gosh.
Just before he got on top of one of Mr. Musk's rockets and went to the International Space Station. And there we were in the dark, early morning hours at Banana Creek.
Pre-dawn.
In the VIP bleachers.
Eating stolen egg McMuffins.
But
we did not have the red lanyards.
But you two ran so Shelley and I could have a backrest. So
we were like kids getting off the school bus looking for the best seats, for sure.
It was just families and close friends of the astronauts. So it wasn't that many people out there to begin with, but we were like, man, we're getting the seats up on the top of the bleachers where you can lean back. And then they had the big hangar there where they have the Saturn rocket, and somebody said, there's food over there. And we were hungry, so we walked down, and they said, yeah, there's more food inside. So we go in, and everything's free. And I'm like, nothing's free. Nothing in life is free.
Not at NASA, that's for sure.
How are we getting free food? And we're loading up on our, egg and cheese sandwiches and heading back out. And then we realized as we walked out that all the other people in there had a different colored thing on, and there was a few people who'd paid for this experience, and we ate their food that day, and I loved every minute of it. We ate their food.
Funny. But the lady did tell us to go in there and get it, so
she did it. We were not like, we
weren't stealing, but they let us eat at their table. It's all come full circle. We were the enemy.
We ate at their table. We yelled and screamed out loud. We held our breath together until main engine cut off. We watched the booster rocket come back down from space. That was something
blue
else.
Flashing lights like the Aurora Borealis.
Incredible. And then we went home. You went home to Montana, and I went home to Atlanta. And then Shane called us from space and said, how'd y'all like the launch? And we're like, what is happening?
Who are you?
What is life right now?
And stop being so calm. He's in the Dragon. Just wanted to call you.
Just like kicking the
I said, do you know where you are, knowing that there's only one place in the station where you can see out, a main place from the cupola? And there's 11 people up there at the moment, and I'm thinking he's probably not where he can see out. But I'm like, do you have any idea where you are right now? He goes, I don't know. Let me look out the window. I'm in the Dragon capsule because I get to sleep in here for the next few weeks. He looks out. He goes, yep, going right over China right now. I'm just going over North Korea. And I was like, this is crazy town.
God.
Now, where did your love for space come from? Because I know where my love of space came from. And his name is you, watching you preach. I mean, honestly, you have absolutely been used to give me an infectious love for space. But where did you first get your interest piqued in it?
Well, I mean, real fast. I was living in Smyrna, Georgia on July 20th, 1969, when on our television set in our living room in our apartment, Neil Armstrong put his foot down on the moon.
Gosh.
And then I went back out in my backyard and looked up, and I mean, that was pretty powerful.
Yeah,
so
that'll do it right there.
Nothing tops that. And then in college, I was at a college retreat in Florida, and we were somewhere near the Cape, and one of the shuttle launches was going to happen. And some kid in our college groups had connections to the Air Force and Air Force Base, and we were going to get to drive our bus way in somewhere close and watch this launch. And so we got up at 1:00 in the morning and drove several hours in the dark and got to this place. And we went through checkpoint 1, checkpoint 2, checkpoint 3. And I'm thinking, this is the way to do this. Then we end up where we're going to watch it from. And I'm like, where's the shuttle? And they're like, oh, it's about 9 miles over that way. Just keep your eyes on the horizon. And I'm like, we got up at 1:00 in the morning to get 9 miles from something? Are you kidding me? Oh. And then finally, about 5 a.m., the thing's getting ready to go, delay, hour long. And we are just acting like punks. We are just complaining and griping. And then finally, around 6:15, they launched that thing. And when they launched it, you couldn't hear a thing. That's how far away we were. Nothing. And then this little tremor started. And then it got louder and louder. And it got so violent that I felt like the fillings in my teeth were going to come flying out. I was screaming at the top of my lungs. And if you were standing right next to me, you couldn't hear me. Dang. And I mean, the earth was shaking underneath our feet. And I was just like, and I mean, from that moment on, I think I was all in. Yes. It's like, if it's space, I'm about it. And then fortunately, we all lived long enough for America to put the Hubble telescope a couple of 100 miles above the Earth and above the Earth's atmosphere. And Hubble revolutionized everything we knew about space and started showing us things we'd never seen before. And when I would see them, like the Sombrero Galaxy, it was taking my breath away. I mean, literally making me gasp. Wow. And so I spoke to a lot of teenagers back then, and I thought, I'll try anything to show them how big God is. And I started using pictures from Hubble, and kids were getting their little flip phones out and taking pictures of the galaxies on the screen. And I went, I'm onto something here.
Yes.
Wow. And Matt Redman loves space. He was a co-lover of it with me. We would trade stuff back and forth because I don't know why, but in the UK, there's a space article on the front page of the paper every single day in the UK. I don't know why. And he would always be trading stuff back and forth, and we fell in love with it, ended up working on this book called Indescribable. A message came, God did that, and then we were at Shane's launch. So it's been a fun ride.
There you go. And it was so fun for me to get to watch you look at the life-size replica of Hubble for the first time. You hadn't seen it before, and you guys had this quiet little moment. We were all doing, the kids were we were mostly trying to coax Lennox down the slide, but you kind of slunk off, and you were off standing there at Hubble, and I was watching you watching. It was just such a special thing because of how many people's faith, mine included, have been built up, with your, just incredible artistic declaration of God's glory using the heavens as an illustration. And I just sent that talk to someone last week, because I wanted him to come to know Jesus. It's old now on YouTube, and but just held up, man. This thing's aged well.
Yeah.
Anyhow, it's just really cool, and it's a neat thing just to think that some little OCD fascination can be used to do something so good. I was just curious, when you were young, were you as particular and as obsessive about things that excited you or interested you as you are today?
I think so. Yeah. I was a pretty organized little kid, and everything had a place and everything belonged in its place. And I don't know where I got that, honestly. My dad wasn't particularly that way, and my mom was a little bit like that, but I was a loner when I was a kid, and I would just sit in my room with my little things, and make sure they were all organized and in the right place. And I don't know where I got it from, but I'm still fighting against it. I think the good side of that's called excellence, and the bad side of that's called control. And finding that fine line in between is where leaders want to live. I want to call people to distort reality. Somebody's got to think of something that you can't do and do it, or else nothing would have ever gotten done.
Right.
But at the same time, you have to be willing to recognize where limitations are and trust other people to come up with great ideas and do things that only they can do. And I think if you can find that little Goldilocks zone of keeping the bar high, but releasing people to do what God's gifted them to do. And if you can find that Goldilocks zone, then you can find longevity and creativity and invention and innovation. And I want to live my whole life there. I just want to keep, going to new frontiers. I don't want to go to Mars necessarily. It's a little too long of a ride for me to live inside a glass house for the rest of my life. But somebody's got to, and somebody's got to plant a church on Mars because people are going there. So somebody right now has got to be thinking about planting a church on Mars. And that's the kind of thinking that I like to be around.
Yeah.
Come on.
Gosh. Well, that's the Goldilocks zone. But and even, we're living in a world though where the most brilliant person alive, arguably, it's a ruckus that he gets picked to be on Saturday Night Live for no reason other than he's rich. Well, I mean, or whatever else it is. He didn't take COVID seriously, but then again, just all exhibiting how important this message is to not give the enemy a seat at your table, because there's always going to be the unhelpful comments in the peanut gallery and this, that, and the other. And now either you're woke or you're racist, but living in this time where we're having to navigate such vocal intensity at all times coming from every direction. Finding that Goldilocks zone and staying in it is going to, for every single one of us, require more than ever the winning the war inside our minds.
Yeah.
So,
well, we thank you, Louie. We love you. I just want to tell you again just how thankful I am for you, Shelley, for your voices in our lives. Truly, you have been a voice of speaking life and encouragement and challenge, and so I'm better because of you. I'm better because of Shelley, and we just are so grateful for you and love you so much.
Thank you, guys. Love you too. Hug kids for us today. Look forward to seeing you soon.
And next time we insist, this next episode, we got to have you and Shelley on together. That'll be.
Hey, I'm 100% for it.
Two communicators in the podcast. Awesome.
Yeah. We're at 52 right now. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay, episode 104.
Episode 104. 1 year from
with
now.
the Giglios.
All we have to do is survive and keep showing up. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the book is Don't Give the Enemy a Seat at Your Table. The author is Louie Giglio. Butch Giglio, Vito Giglio's great-grandson is how he likes to be introduced. The curriculum for it, I imagine for small groups, all the things, study guides, right?
Yeah.
Audible book. Read it myself and pumped about it. Got a few little side comments here and there, and a great interview with Jay and Catherine Wolf on the audiobook also. So the study guides really, the guys did a phenomenal job with it. I taught some of the sessions, taught all the sessions actually, but our team did a great job putting it all together. And I hope a lot of small groups will jump into that this summer and into the fall.
I'm
so
sure
you guys are awesome.
September comes around, there's going to be a lot of churches looking for that. So email your pastor now or get your small group ready and get some of those kits, because that is really, did Lifeway do that? Did Nelson do the curriculum?
Nelson did it, yeah.
Okay, so you can get that probably. Was there a website for it all?
You can find all this stuff at, the best place is don'tgivetheenemyaseat.com. Excuse me. Don'tgivetheenemy.com.
Don't give the
so
enemy.
We're not even giving him a seat.
You know what? I think
don'tgivetheenemy.com is where you can find everything connected to the book. And obviously, searching anywhere books are sold, you can find it. LouieGiglio.com is a good link to all the things. And so any way that you want to find it that way.
Don'tgivetheenemy.com. And ladies and gentlemen, don't forget the brand new or the new iteration of Louie Giglio's podcast, Passion and Purpose.
Yeah.
Presumably available on every platform possible, or is it all being kind of aggregated at one spot?
It's going to be available everywhere that we can make it available, and we haven't worked it out completely yet, but we're hoping to be able, by the time the podcast releases, that you'll be able to buy the book with Dogecoin. So we haven't confirmed that, but we're still in the works to get it solidified.
Wow, I don't even know what that means. Do you?
No.
I'll have to Google it later. Okay, well, you've given us a lot to think about.
We love you.
Thank you for your time, Louie.
Yes.
We love you.
Love you guys. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for listening. And be sure to swing by LeviLusko.com to see what's going on in our world, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. In the meantime, we would love to connect with you on social media. Jenny and Levi Lusko, out.